When we speak of the Mother Archetype, we do not speak of your personal mother alone, nor of the woman whose hands first held your fragile body, nor of the person whose words shaped your early sense of safety or danger. We are speaking of something older than any individual memory, something woven into the very architecture of the psyche, something that existed long before your particular story and will exist long after you leave this earthly scene. The Mother Archetype is not merely a figure, it is a field. It is the first container of your being, the primordial soil in which the roots of your consciousness either flourish or twist in silent agony. And when this archetype is wounded within an empath, when it becomes distorted, absent, ambivalent, or shadowed, the entire inner world bends around that void. The empath's sensitivity becomes both a gift and a curse. They become the child who listens too deeply, feels too much, and carries burdens that do not belong to them. They mistake their heightened intuition for responsibility, as if they were born to heal the pain that formed before their own birth. They absorb the unspoken sorrows of the lineage. They inherit emotional debts that their unconscious beliefs must be paid. You sit before me now, and I can feel the weight of this heritage in your silence. There is a part of you that has always felt chosen for a task you never agreed to perform. A part that has always walked into rooms sensing tension before words were spoken. A part that learned the emotional weather of your home, the way sailors learn the sea by reading the subtle shifts in the air, by intuiting storms before they broke. And yet, what you believed to be intuition was often survival. What you believed to be empathy was often hypervigilance. What you believed to be love was an adaptation to the mother shadow. The mother shadow emerges not only from neglect or harshness, but also from emotional enmeshment, inconsistency, or the overwhelming presence of a wounded maternal figure whose own unconscious spills into the lives of those around her. When the mother archetype is wounded, the empath child becomes the moon circling a collapsed star. They shine with a borrowed light, not knowing that the gravity pulling them inward is not their own destiny, but the unresolved pain of another. And because the unconscious does not speak in logic, but in symbols, dreams, impulses, and repetitions, the empath grows into adulthood, carrying patterns they cannot see. They begin choosing relationships that echo the original wound. They enter bonds with people who cannot receive them, who cannot see them, who cannot soothe them. They confuse chaos with intimacy, distance with safety, self-abandonment with devotion. And this is why, until the mother archetype is healed, the shadow chooses pain repeatedly, not because you desire suffering, but because the psyche repeats what it has not yet understood. Tonight, as we gather in this space, I ask you to allow the veil of your rational mind to loosen. Let the deeper currents rise. Let the symbols speak. You may feel sensations, memories, or emotions surface that you have dismissed for years. That is not a regression, That is the unconscious opening its hidden door. Imagine, if you will, a dream. In this dream, you walk through a house with many rooms. Each room represents a stage of your emotional development. Some rooms are tidy and sunlit, filled with memories that feel warm and safe. Others are cold, abandoned, or dimly lit with flickering lamps. But at the end of the hallway, there is always one locked door. You have passed it many times, pretending it held nothing of importance, yet tonight, in the dream, the door is slightly ajar. You push it open, and there she is not your personal mother, but the mother archetype itself. She is both young and ancient. She is comforting and frightening. She is the giver of life and the keeper of wounds. Her presence fills the room with a strange familiarity, as if you have known her across centuries. And she speaks without words. You have carried what was never yours. This is the moment the empath begins to awaken. This is the moment you realize that your sensitivity did not appear by accident. It was sculpted by conditions in which you had to become attuned to survive. But survival strategies do not disappear simply because you grow older. They transform into compulsions, into patterns of attraction, into the silent gravitational pull toward those who echo the earliest emotional wounds. And this is what I have called the unholy repetition, the unconscious attempt to resolve the original wound by recreating it again and again until consciousness intervenes. You may sit here and believe that your adult relationships are failures of will or character. You may believe that you simply chose the wrong people or loved too fiercely. But I tell you now, with the weight of decades of clinical observation, the shadow chooses what the conscious mind denies. The shadow selects partners, circumstances, and emotional dynamics that reflect the unresolved wound in perfect symbolic form. And until the mother archetype is healed, your shadow will continue choosing pain, not because it hates you, but because it is trying to finish a story that began long before you understood the plot. The empath who heals the mother archetype undergoes a profound inversion of identity. It is as though the entire psychic structure reorganizes itself from the inside out, no longer compelled to fix, soothe, or predict the emotional states of others. The empath begins to sense the magnitude of the energy they have been giving away. They begin to understand that their sensitivity was never meant to be a leash pulling them toward the suffering of others. It was meant to be a gateway to their own depth, their own intuition, their own power, and yet the healing is not gentle. It is not a soft unveiling. It is a confrontation with the deepest maternal imprint. What you internalized about safety, worth, love, boundaries, and identity. To heal this archetype is to meet the original source of your people-pleasing, your chronic self-sacrifice, your instinct to rescue others, your inability to receive nurturing without feeling guilt, your attraction to those who cannot love you fully. It is to stand before the mother shadow and say, I release what is not mine. Let us return to the dream. You stand before the mother archetype. Behind her, the room is filled with symbolic objects, broken mirrors, wilted flowers, half-burned candles, children's drawings, fragments of letters never sent. These objects are not random. They are the emotional residues of your early life. Each one represents an inner belief you absorbed before you had the capacity to question whether it was yours to carry. You pick up a cracked mirror and see not your reflection but a younger version of yourself, eyes wide, alert, scanning the world for danger that was never yours to sense. You pick up a wilted flower and feel the sadness of having given your emotional nourishment to others before understanding you deserved to keep some for yourself. You touch the burned candle and realize how much of your life force you have sacrificed in the name of loyalty, duty, or misplaced compassion. And then the mother speaks again, your suffering is a map, not a sentence. This is the crux of the healing. The empath must reframe the wound not as an identity, but as an initiation. The mother archetype does not heal through avoidance or intellectual insight. It heals through the integration of the abandoned self. The part of you that stayed frozen at the moment, the original emotional wound took root. The child who had to become an adult too early. The child who had to become intuitive before they were ready. The child who had to become the emotional support for a parent who could not support themselves. If you listen closely, you may notice your body responding as I speak. The mother wound is stored somatically in the muscles of the chest, the solar plexus, the throat, and the abdomen. Healing it is not merely psychological, it is physiological. It is the slow unwinding of the nervous system from decades of unconscious contraction. And the moment the empath begins to heal, something extraordinary happens. The shadow no longer needs to choose pain to communicate. The shadow relaxes. Its compulsions weaken. Its hunger for repetition dissolves. You begin choosing relationships that honor your emotional depth rather than exploit it. You begin sensing your own needs instead of drowning in the needs of others. And perhaps most profoundly, you begin experiencing love not as a battlefield of unconscious loyalties, but as a sacred exchange between sovereign souls. I see this shift occur in the dreams of my patients long before it appears in daily life. The dreamscape reveals the psyche's transformations with poetic precision. An empath who is healing the mother archetype often dreams of returning to a childhood home, only to discover that the house has been renovated, filled with light, or expanded with new rooms. They dream of feeding a neglected child. They dream of confronting a maternal figure with calm clarity. They dream of reclaiming keys they once lost. These are not random images. They are psychic signatures of individuation, the process through which the self becomes whole. And now, as I draw this first movement of our lecture to a close, I ask you to hold one truth within your heart. When the mother archetype is healed, Your destiny no longer bends around inherited wounds. The shadow stops choosing pain because it no longer needs pain to speak. And in that liberation, the empath becomes not a carrier of generational sorrow, but a channel of consciousness itself. As we continue this journey into the depth of the Mother Archetype, I invite you to breathe with a presence that is not merely physical but symbolic. Every breath is a conversation with the unconscious. Inhale, and you draw up material that has been buried for years. Exhale, and you release fragments of an identity that no longer belongs to you. The empath who heals the Mother Archetype must learn to breathe differently, to feel differently, to perceive themselves not as an emotional extension of others, but as a sovereign center of awareness. This shift marks the beginning of psychological birth, a second emergence into life where you are no longer defined by the emotional climate you were raised in. Many of you mistake inherited emotional patterns for intuition. You believe your capacity to pick up subtle cues, to sense the unspoken, to anticipate emotional storms is evidence of spiritual attunement. And while empathy can indeed blossom into a profound spiritual sensitivity, its origin is often far more earthly. It begins in the nervous system of a child who had to read the room to survive. A child who learned that their sense of safety depended on the emotional state of a parent. A child who developed a kind of hyper-awareness, not as a gift, but as armor. These early adaptations become so natural, so integrated into your identity, that by the time you reach adulthood, you cannot distinguish between intuition and trauma, between inner knowing and conditioned vigilance. This confusion is one of the deepest marks of the mother shadow. It ensures that an empath remains emotionally entangled with others, unable to differentiate where they end and another begins, and until this entanglement dissolves, the shadow continues to choose relationships that reinforce it. You may find yourself drawn repeatedly to people who are emotionally inconsistent, unavailable, or needy, because these dynamics echo the original maternal imprint. You may become the healer, the caretaker, the emotional anchor, not because you consciously choose these roles, but because your psyche is attempting to rewrite the unresolved story of your early life. The unconscious does not care about your happiness. It cares about completion. It seeks to recreate the wound so that you may finally become aware of what you have been carrying. Consider another dream that often arises during this stage of healing. In the dream, you find yourself walking through a forest at night. The trees are tall and silent, their branches forming a vaulted ceiling like an ancient cathedral. The darkness is not threatening, it is expectant. You carry a lantern, and its light reaches only a few steps ahead. This is symbolic of the empath's journey. Your consciousness illuminates only what you are ready to face. Suddenly, you hear the sound of footsteps behind you. You turn, and there she is again, the Mother Archetype. not as a figure of comfort, but as a shadowed presence. She does not speak, she simply watches. Her gaze is heavy with the weight of centuries. And in that silence, you feel both fear and familiarity. This tension is the essence of the mother shadow, the pull toward what is known, even when it is painful, and the simultaneous yearning to walk beyond it. The empath who heals the mother archetype must learn to confront this gaze without collapsing into old patterns of appeasement or fear. You must understand that the shadow does not wish to harm you. It wishes to be integrated. It wishes to be understood. And so you walk deeper into the forest, deeper into the unknown, carrying your lantern, trusting that the light, though small, is sufficient. Healing the mother archetype often triggers a period of emotional disorientation. Many describe it as a shedding, a psychic mold, a dissolution of the old self. The ways you once reacted no longer feel natural. The roles you played no longer fit. The relationships you tolerated no longer make sense. It is as if the scaffolding you built your life upon begins to crumble. You may feel lost, untethered, or strangely empty. This emptiness is not a void. It is a clearing. Something is making space for a deeper emergence. The empath who has spent a lifetime filling others cannot recognize the sensation of inner spaciousness. It feels foreign, almost uncomfortable. You may find yourself wanting to rush back into familiar emotional patterns simply because they are known, but healing requires stillness. It requires allowing the inner landscape to reorganize itself without your interference. In my work, I have seen how profoundly the mother archetype shapes an empath's sense of self-worth. Those who carry the mother wound often develop a form of conditional identity. I am valuable when I help. I am lovable when I give. I am safe when I am needed. These beliefs become the invisible architecture of the ego. They are not questioned because they feel true, but they are not truth. They are trauma. And when the empath begins to heal, these structures begin to crack. You may feel guilt when you set boundaries. You may feel fear when you receive instead of give. You may feel unworthy when someone shows you genuine care. These feelings are not signs that you are doing something wrong. They are signs that you are stepping beyond the emotional world you were conditioned to inhabit. The mother archetype is not healed by rejecting your personal mother, nor by idealizing her. It is healed by seeing her clearly as a human being shaped by her own wounds, her own unconscious, her own shadow. This clarity liberates both you and her. It frees you from the burden of carrying what she could not resolve. It frees her from the pedestal or the prison of your projections. And it allows the archetype itself, the primordial feminine within your psyche, to reveal its true nature. For the empath, this revelation is transformative. Once the mother archetype is healed, empathy becomes something entirely different. It is no longer a tool for survival. It becomes a channel for intuition. creativity, and genuine connection you begin to feel without absorbing. You begin to sense without suffering. You begin to love without losing yourself. This is the moment the shadow stops choosing pain. For pain is no longer the only language through which your unconscious can speak. Let us return for a moment to the dream in the forest. You continue walking forward, the lantern flickering in your hand. The mother shadow follows at a distance, no longer looming, but observing. As you step into a clearing, the moonlight spills over the trees, and the forest floor begins to glow with a soft silver sheen. You notice a pool of water at the center of the clearing, perfectly still and mirror-like. You kneel beside it and see your reflection, not the wounded child, not the exhausted empath, not the caretaker, but a version of yourself you have never fully recognized. There is a strength in your eyes that surprises you, a sovereignty, a depth untouched by the chaos of others, and as you gaze at this reflection, the mother shadow steps beside you. For the first time, you see her clearly. She is not monstrous or broken. She is ancient and wise, carrying both the wounds and the wisdom of the feminine lineage. She places her hand on your shoulder, and in the touch, you feel a release, a loosening of the emotional knots you have carried for decades. This moment is symbolic of the integration process. You are no longer rejecting the mother shadow, nor are you collapsing into it. You are meeting it with consciousness, acknowledging both its gifts and its wounds. And in that acknowledgement, the archetype transforms. The mother becomes not a source of pain, but a guide, not a burden, but a foundation. Not a ghost of the past, but a living energy within your psyche. Many empaths fear losing their sensitivity when they heal the mother archetype. They fear becoming hardened, detached, or indifferent. But the opposite is true. Healing does not diminish your feeling. It refines it. It teaches you to distinguish between compassion and self-erasure, between intuition and hypervigilance, between love and trauma bonding. You become more discerning, not less loving, more grounded, not less sensitive, more present, not less empathetic. The moment the mother archetype heals, the empath's energy stops leaking into the emotional worlds of others. This is often experienced as a sudden increase in personal power. You may notice that people who once drained you no longer have access to your energy. You may feel a new internal boundary, a quiet but unshakable sense of self that cannot be manipulated. This is not aggression. It is alignment. It is the restoration of the inner center that was fractured in childhood. As we close this second movement of our lecture, I want you to hold one truth gently but firmly. The mother wound is not your fault, but its healing is your responsibility. And when you take up that responsibility, not with self-blame, but with clarity, compassion, and courage, you become the architect of your own destiny. The shadow stops choosing pain because you no longer need pain to understand who you are. As we enter deeper into this exploration, I want you to recognize something that most people spend a lifetime avoiding. The mother archetype is not healed through understanding alone. Insight is merely the doorway. What transforms you is the emotional descent, the willingness to feel what you could not feel as a child, the courage to encounter the forgotten parts of yourself that you left behind in order to survive, the surrender to a process that seems to unravel you before it rebuilds you. This inner descent resembles the ancient myths in which the hero must travel into the underworld, guided only by instinct and the faint memory of who they might become. For the empath, this descent is not simply symbolic, it is visceral. It is the moment you stop running from your own emotional reality. When the mother archetype has been wounded, the empath develops a reflexive orientation toward the external world. You learn to feel outward, to scan outward, to manage outward. Other people's needs become easier to sense than your own. Other people's emotions become louder than your own. You become a shapeshifter, adjusting to the emotional climate around you without ever noticing that you have lost your own temperature. The tragedy is not that you became sensitive. The tragedy is that your sensitivity became a survival strategy, and survival strategies always extract a cost. They narrow your identity. They distort your inner compass. They teach you to abandon yourself in subtle and invisible ways. Healing the mother archetype requires reversing this orientation. It requires turning your sensitivity inward, reclaiming it from the service of others, bringing it back into your body, your instincts, your inner truth. At first, this feels disorienting. You may feel raw, as if your skin has been turned inside out. You may feel emotions. You have long suppressed grief, anger, longing, fear rising in waves. You cannot predict or control, but these emotions are not regressions. They are releases. They are the cries of the self that was silenced so long ago it forgot how to speak. Imagine another dream, one that often arises during the midpoint of this transformation. You find yourself standing at the edge of a vast sea. The waves crash with a force that feels both frightening and strangely comforting. The sky above is turbulent, swirling with dark clouds, as if a storm is preparing to break. You feel drawn to the water even though you know its depths are treacherous. As you step closer, you notice a small child standing at the shoreline. The child is you, untouched by time, holding a small wooden boat carved from memory. The child looks up at you with a mixture of hope and fear, and at that instant, you understand the healing of the mother archetype is not about rewriting the past, it is about retrieving the self you lost in it. The empath's greatest wound is the abandonment of their own inner child, not a childish part, but the vital, instinctual core of the psyche, the part that knows how to feel without shame, how to need without fear, how to express without hesitation. When the mother archetype is distorted, the child learns that certain emotions are dangerous, that certain needs are burdens, that their essence is too much or not enough. The empath adapts by becoming small in the places they should be expansive, quiet in the places they should be expressive, invisible in the places they should be sovereign. And this self-abandonment becomes the blueprint for how they engage with the world. The moment you reclaim the inner child is the moment the shadow begins to soften. The shadow no longer needs to create painful scenarios to attract your attention. It no longer needs to push you toward people who wound you in familiar ways. It no longer needs to speak through repetition or emotional chaos. Instead, it becomes an ally, a reservoir of intuition, creativity, and instinctual power. The integration of the shadow is the liberation of the empath. You may feel this integration physically. Some describe a warmth rising in the chest, a loosening in the throat, a grounding sensation in the abdomen. Others feel a sudden clarity of perception, as though the emotional fog that once clouded their vision has lifted. You begin to see others more clearly, not through the lens of their wounds, but through the lens of your boundaries. You begin to sense the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice. You begin to understand that love without self is not love at all, but a continuation of the wound. And yet, I must tell you the truth that many resist healing. The mother archetype often disrupts your relationships, not because healing is destructive, but because it exposes the foundation upon which those relationships were built. If you have lived your life as an emotional caretaker, a seasoned absorber, a healer without rest, then those who benefited from your self-abandonment may feel threatened by your awakening. They may say, "You have changed," and they will not mean it as a compliment. They may accuse you of becoming cold, distant, selfish. But these accusations arise not from truth, but from familiarity. You are no longer participating in the unconscious contract that once defined the relationship. That contract was simple. You give, they take, you absorb, they project, you carry, they collapse. And now you no longer agree. The empath who heals the mother archetype must learn to tolerate the discomfort of disappointing others. This is not cruelty. This is individuation. This is the act of reclaiming authority over your emotional world. You are not responsible for the emotional equilibrium of others. You are responsible for your truth. And when you begin to live from that truth, your presence itself becomes magnetic, not because you are giving your energy away, but because you are rooted in yourself. Consider a final dream for this movement. You stand once more in the forest, but this time the lantern is brighter. The mother shadow no longer follows behind you. She walks beside you, no longer commanding you, no longer haunting you, but supporting you. In the dream, you come upon a large tree with deep roots and an opening carved into its trunk. Inside rests a glowing seed. The mother places her hand on your back, and you instinctively reach for the seed. The moment your fingers close around it, the forest brightens, the air warms, and the shadow dissolves into light. You awaken from the dream with a profound sense of clarity, as though something ancient within you has returned home. This seed is symbolic of the self, the core of your being, the source of your life force. When the mother archetype is healed, the self emerges with a quiet power that cannot be taken, manipulated, or extinguished. This is the moment the empath steps into their destiny. Not a destiny defined by martyrdom or self-sacrifice, but one defined by alignment, intuition, and inner authority. The shadow stops choosing pain because the inner child has been claimed, the mother archetype has been integrated, and the empath no longer seeks in others what they have learned to give themselves. As we close this third movement, I want you to reflect on a simple but profound truth. Healing does not make you less sensitive. It makes you less enslaved. It does not make you less compassionate. It makes you less willing to abandon yourself. It does not make you less loving. It makes your love clean, so fine, and anchored in the self. As we enter the final movement of this journey, I want you to feel how different your inner landscape has become since we first stepped into the depths of the mother archetype. Something has shifted beneath the surface, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet inevitability of spring thawing the last ice of winter. This is how true psychological transformation occurs, not in the explosive moments of insight, but in the subtle rearrangements of the inner world, where old patterns loosen their grip and new possibilities take root almost without your noticing. The empath who heals the mother archetype does not merely recover from a wound, they are reborn into an entirely different relationship with themselves. They become a being who understands the language of their own emotions.